Welcome to the referendum debate. Each month we'll be travelling around Scotland, giving you the chance to ask the questions you want answered. Tonight we're in Greenock on the Firth of Clyde. Our panel are SNP Culture Secretary in the Scottish Government, Fiona Hislop; Scottish Labour's Deputy Leader, Anna Sarwar; comedian and actor Sanjeev Kohli; and journalist and blogger Alex Massey. And in the interest of a good debate, our audience tonight are evenly divided between supporters and opponents of independence, plus some who are undecided, as are two of our panellists, Alex and Sanjeev. Our audience here in Greenock have submitted their questions, and our panel have not seen those questions. And our first question is from Jim Watson. Mr. Watson.
Would removing Trident leave Scotland open to attack?
Fiona Hislop.
No. I think in terms of the defence needs in a modern nation, Trident is not what Scotland needs. We know the vast majority of people think that Trident should be removed from Scotland. We have the opportunity to do that. And the money that we can save from not replacing Trident can be invested in jobs, can be put into childcare, so we can make sure that as a society we can live a life that is based on values that aren't based on weapons of mass destruction, but are based on what our children need. And that's one of the big choices people can make at the referendum, and that's one of the arguments. In terms of defence, there are certainly other means and mechanisms internationally, and indeed if you're now getting some of the senior defence staff in the United Kingdom questioning the replacement of Trident, I think you can realise that this is one of the big issues that people can make a decision about. There's an opportunity in September to make sure that this country, our Scotland, can be one that does not have weapons of mass destruction on our soil.
Anna Sarwar.
I think the Trident issue goes to the heart of the incoherence of the case made for independence by the SNP. Because you've heard one example already from Fiona to say that the money that's saved from Trident would be spent on maybe tackling child poverty. It's already been made clear by the SNP's leader in Westminster that the money that they'd save allegedly on Trident would be spent on upskilling and upscaling a Scottish military here in the event of independence. You can only spend the money once. The second point about NATO membership, the SNP changed their position to say we want to remain members of NATO. NATO is, by its very definition, a nuclear alliance of nations across this part of the world. That goes against the very nature of what we're saying about having a nuclear-free Scotland. And the third and most important point is I don't want to just rid Scotland of nuclear weapons. I want to rid the world of nuclear weapons. I want to make the world a safer place. And I don't think moving weapons of mass destruction a few hundred miles down the road is the solution. Let's instead have a multilateral approach that rids the world of nuclear weapons and makes sure we create a fairer, safer and more secure world in the process.
Sanjeev Kohli, the question was, would removing Trident leave Scotland open to attack? What do you think?
Well, I mean, I agree with Anas in the sense that I agree, I'm sure most people, unless they're naturally violent, would agree with multilateral removal of nuclear weapons, but I don't see why Scotland can't start with unilateral removal of nuclear weapons. I don't think we need them. I think, I'm possibly naive in saying this, but I just don't think, as someone who is very much swithering on the whole independence debate, I have to say that's one of the instances where I would swither in the direction of independence. I think that they were landed on our doorstep, and it did make us a target for attack, and I sooner would rather see Scotland rid of all nuclear weapons and the money spent on better things. That's probably my reaction as a human being, as a father, but that's kind of where I stand.
Alex Massey, you say you're swithering as well. So which does this persuade you in one direction or another? And of course, bearing in mind where we are, that these these weapons are just across the Firth of Clyde and obviously a source of a considerable number of jobs here.
Well, yes, they're just across the Firth of Clyde, so I suppose the good news is that Dunoon will get it first. Secondly, this is a non-issue. The notion that this is the sort of thing that you should base your vote upon in the referendum and so on strikes me as being both banal, trivial and tedious.
Nuclear war.
The question was removing Trident, would that leave an independent Scotland open to attack? The answer is obviously no, it wouldn't. I mean, attacked by whom? And even if an independent Scotland were quixotically to try and retain nuclear capability, which of course nobody is proposing because such a thing would be an absurdity, it wouldn't deter any attack. This is, as I say, a non-issue. It is true, as Anas Sarwar says, that there is a certain incoherence in the SNP's approach. That is, that they dislike the idea of nuclear weapons being based in Scottish waters, but they are quite happy to be part of a defence alliance that is guaranteed by nuclear weapons. That is, they want Scotland to be nuclear free, but they want to live within or beneath a nuclear umbrella led by the United States. And that's fine. But, you know, the answer to the question is no. And I think this is not really the sort of issue that we should be talking about in terms of what is a fairly momentous decision. It's about something rather bigger than nuclear weapons and SNP defence policy. OK,
well, I'd encourage you to put your hands up and contribute to the debate if you want to contribute, if you have a point, especially given, as I say, where we are and the relevance to this particular part of the world. So put your hands up. But Anas Sarwar for now.
Alex picked up on the trivial point of this. The reality is the choice we face on the 18th of September is about what's best for people that live here in Scotland, about what's best for your jobs, your pensions, your safety and your security. And what we've seen from the Nationalists is an attempt to make it a referendum on something else. Nuclear weapons are bad, they're wrong, it doesn't make independence right. We've heard about Iraq. Iraq was wrong, it was a mistake, it doesn't make independence right. The Tories are bad, the Tory government is a mistake, it doesn't make independence right. Let's actually have a debate and an argument based about what's best for people here, and that's making sure we keep the safety and security being part of the UK, but more importantly move on to a debate about what's best for here in Scotland and how we tackle the real issues like the cost of living crisis, youth unemployment and making sure every pensioner has dignity in retirement. Let's talk about the kind of Scotland. Let's talk about the kind of Scotland and the kind of society we want to live in and the kind of society we want to bring up our children in. Let's not talk about trivial issues like we see from the Nationalists.
All right, Fiona Hislop.
I think defence, I think the Iraq war are far from trivial. I think the loss of life during that war, both in Iraq and also by our troops, are far from trivial. So when we're making decisions about our future, our choice, it is about different issues, and different issues will affect different people. For some people it will be pensions, for some it will be childcare, it will be jobs, but never, ever, ever think that defence and foreign affairs are somehow trivial. Every nation must take its place, and the responsibility, the moral responsibility, not least, is far, far from trivial.
OK, we're going to go down onto the floor now. And we'll start just on the end with yourself, sir, just in the front. Thank you.
Thank you. Firstly, I'm glad I moved from Dunoon, because if Dunoon's first to hit, I'd be here for a long, shorter time. What I haven't heard is nobody's mentioned the cost involved in closing down Fastlane and decimating the west of Scotland. Not only the financial cost, but the hardship to those people who work in it. This area will be completely gutted if Fastlane goes. There'll be hundreds of people put out of work, not just those that work at Fastlane, but all the industries it supplies. So can somebody give me a figure of what it's going to cost the Scottish Government to remove Trident from Fastlane?
OK, we'll take a couple more. We'll take a couple more and then we'll come back for that. The lady in the middle with her hand up. Yes.
Should we retain Fastlane but charge the UK for using it and therefore make money from it if Scotland were to become independent?
Thank you very much. And over here.
It really is, I agree with Mr Massey, it really is a non-issue. It's just another example of SNP hypocrisy. They want to get rid of the weapon, but they want to join the club. It's like a golfer who gets rid of his clubs, goes along to the nearest golf club and says, I'd like to join. Can I use your clubs?
This is the membership of NATO, which the Scottish National Party is now in favour of, having been opposed for some time. How do you square that circle?
Well, we'd be the same as 25 out of the 28 members of NATO who don't have nuclear weapons. But in terms... Sorry?
You have the term now, and you're giving it up.
In terms of our contribution, there's obviously, if you think about George Robertson, who his comment was in terms of when he was in charge of NATO, that any new members must be committed to removal of nuclear weapons. Now, what better way of removing nuclear weapons than starting as an independent state by removing them, which again reflects the ethos of the point. But the point, I think, goes back to how effective are nuclear deterrent in a modern system where intelligence issues, terrorism are not going to be deflected or avoided by having nuclear weapons. The challenges for defence are far more complex and different than they were, say, 40 or 50 years ago. And in terms of jobs, in terms of the replacement of jobs, diversification, there are plans in place that can make sure that Faslane is retained for some defence matters and ensure that their employment is provided. And I think that's a very, very important point that's raised, and we are perfectly capable of making sure that happens. And I think there's many of the trade unions, for example, have got a very effective plan in place as to how we can use the engineering capacity of those that are there, and particularly to make sure that Scotland remains and can be developed as a powerhouse in terms of engineering, because the skills and talents need to be diversified.
Thank you.
But Fiona, you've changed your position not because you've changed your mind, but because you want to win people's votes.
No.
It's about saying we don't like nuclear weapons. And actually, Angus Robertson said so at the SNP conference when the position was changed. It's like saying we oppose nuclear weapons, but actually want to join a nuclear club, just as the gentleman said in the audience. It's like Alex Salmond arguing for years and years that sterling was a noose around the neck of Scotland, and we actually either needed to join the euro or a separate currency to get genuine independence. But now say we'd keep the pound as part of the UK.
All right.
It's not about changing your mind; it's about changing your position, because you know the electoral numbers don't stack.
Thank you both. No, for now, thanks for the moment. We'll come down into the middle. The gentleman in the middle with the glasses and the striped shirt. Yes, hang on a second, sir. We'll bring a microphone to you.
There's been so much talk about defence and defence and defence, but weapons of mass destruction or nuclear weapons, they're actually one of the last resources we need. The first thing we need to discuss is what will happen to the Scottish military, Scottish Army, Scottish Navy, and Scottish Air Force. What about them? How are we going to manage to separate our troops from the whole of the UK Union Army, military, Army, Air Force and Navy?
Thank you. Thank you very much. The lady in the middle, right in the middle of the audience. Yes.
Mr Sarwar says that we are just moving the problem down to England, but this vote is not about England. We can't say to them, you need to get rid of it as well. This is just about us. We haven't got a vote for what they're going to do with it. So that's fairly pointless. And I would also like to say that you say that they chop and change their mind to get votes and whatever else, and I'm not an SNP voter, I have to point that out. Are you kidding on? Because Labour have went so far to the right that they're practically Tories in red ties to get I'm not interested in this.
Thank you very much.
I can assure you that, speaking from a right-of-centre perspective, the idea that the Labour Party, particularly the Labour Party in Scotland, are suddenly now Tories in red ties is the sort of thing about which I occasionally dream. But if only that were the case, madam. But the rest of your point was very cogent, I thought.
But let's be absolutely clear. There's been an attempt to try and rewrite or claim the Labour movement's history. The Labour movement and the Labour history hasn't changed at all. I'm proud of the fact that there was a Labour movement right across the UK that thought of, campaigned for and delivered the NHS, the welfare state and the minimum wage.
All right.
That's things that we did together.
Thank you. Strangleholded by the Tories. Don't tell me you've defended the welfare state because it's a joke.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Anna Sarwar. One very brief word from Sanjeev Kohli.
Well, I just wanted to bring back the point the gentleman made about the decommissioning of Faslane. Now, obviously, we would hope that everyone would get some form of employment, but to talk about perpetuating Faslane to keep jobs on, it's a bit like saying, well, we should keep serial killers out of jail because it gives police jobs. You can't, unfortunately, you can't use that argument to perpetuate nuclear weapons in Scotland.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Right, we're going to move on to another question, but don't forget you can join tonight's debate on Twitter. Use the BBC IndieRef hashtag, and if you want to come and take part in a future programme, well, we'll be in the Borders in Kelso on the 18th of February and then in Kirkcaldy in Fife on the 18th of March. To apply to join the audience, just go to the BBC website and search for Referendum Debate. And you can also email us and you can watch the programme too on the BBC Scotland news website, where we will publish a selection of your comments. So that's the best place to go to get in touch. Now let's move on to the next question, which is from Andrew Mackenzie, who's owner of a butcher's here in Greenock. Mr Mackenzie.
When I walk about this town, what I see is an abundance of charity shops, pawnbrokers, money shops, and now food banks. Do you think this might be one of the reasons why so many of us are considering voting yes?
Anna Sarwar.
I think they're all massively important issues, and issues that go to the heart of the real issues that will actually affect people right across the country. The reality is independence is not the solution to them. Actually having a debate about how we create a society that works equally in an economy that works equally for people at the top as well as the bottom is more important. How we create a social model that works for people that ensures that those with the broadest shoulders face the greatest burden is actually the real territory we're talking on. Instead, we have a debate dominated by the obsessions of independence. I'll give you a perfect example of that. While right across the UK, the main story of this week has been about the minimum wage and what level it should be set at for people right across the UK, we were here in Scotland obsessing about independence. Now, the fact, and the lady said earlier on about the labour movement and where it's changed, the fact that about 10 years ago or 15 years ago, the very notion of a minimum wage seemed like a fantasy, but now we're talking about a minimum wage, what level it should be set at, and actually see the living wage as an expectation and not an exception, shows that progress can be made as part of the UK, and we can achieve social justice by working across the UK.
I wonder if I can ask Mr Mackenzie, I mean, what do you make of that? I mean, do you think that this is the reason that, as you see it, the rundown nature of the economy here, why people are thinking of voting yes? Are you thinking of voting yes because of that?
Very much so. Things they're not great. And what the No campaign has failed to put across, if we vote no, does it just mean more of the same?
Does it?
Again, I emphasise the real social and economic change doesn't come from independence. It actually comes from people working alongside their colleagues and friends across the UK to achieve that social change right across the UK. Now, this notion that we haven't had any successes or haven't been on the journey of achieving social justice across the UK is just not a true one. The fact that we actually have, for example, the minimum wage, the NHS, the welfare state, all things that were achieved by the UK together. No one ever argued, let's just have them here in Greenock or just have them in Scotland. We argued for having them right across the UK. That pooling and sharing of resources argument, so we actually create systems that benefit people right across the UK. That's actually a much bigger idea than independence. Looking outwards and sharing, not looking inwards and obsessing about constitutional politics.
Thank you very much. Alex Massey.
I think it's a reasonable question, Mr Mackenzie. I think the question needs to be answered, however, in terms of where power lies. What we have seen over the course of recent decades, and this is true whether there's been a Conservative government in London, a Labour government in London, or an SNP government in Edinburgh, is increased centralisation. So we have seen local communities have their powers stripped away from them. In the 19th century, town councils in places like Greenock and other parts of Scotland and so on were responsible for raising more than 50% of their income. These days, that's less than 15%. Local government, local democracy these days is increasingly neither very local nor very democratic. Unless you empower the people to run their own affairs, unless you empower people to run their own towns, then I see no real reason for optimism and so on. We have a government in Edinburgh at the moment that is increasingly hell-bent on centralisation in all sorts of areas, from health provision to policing to just about every element of human activity. It's a government that thinks it should be legislating, after all, on what songs you sing at football matches.
OK, Alex Massey, I wonder if I can
but this is an important point. You know, the way to revive town centres across Scotland is to empower towns across Scotland, which just means empowering town councils, giving them back the authority they once had. And trusting people to actually run their own affairs. It is a question of governance, and it's a question of localism and a question of local democracy. Right. Without that, then this sort of decline cannot really be stemmed, far less reversed.
OK. Fiona Hislop, I mean, Alex Massey makes the point there that if you're in favour of distributing powers, essentially decentralising, why has your government centralised so many powers? And isn't that having an effect in places like Greenock?
I represent a constituency in West Lothian. In terms of policing, I have more direct and connection with my local inspector for that area than we had previously under that system.
But in terms of the economy, haven't you squeezed the councils to the extent that there's very little they can do?
No, the share of local government spend under the SNP administration is higher as a proportion of the whole than before. We've tried to protect that precisely because a lot of the services are local. But I think the point, with respect to the questioner, I think the question you ask gets to the heart of what we want to see from our society and how we can best get there. And I think the decades have gone by where people have looked to the Labour Party, and I can share my vision of a Scotland with people who have voted Labour in the past because they thought they would achieve that. This is no longer about the SNP or Labour. This is actually about the type of country we want and how we get there. And we do face a choice of two futures. It's not a case of what independence can deliver against the status quo. It's actually about what do we think will happen with the UK government under social security in the future, under whatever guise or flavour of government. And we started to see in previous years the dismantling of the NHS under different administrations in the UK.
It's not been dismantled anywhere.
In Scotland, we've protected, we've actually taken away, we've cancelled the privatisation of contracts in the health service precisely because we believe that as a public service.
Let's just
You've cancelled it precisely because you put ideology above patient needs.
In terms of food banks, in terms of why do people in this country have to go to food banks when we should actually be one of the richest societies and economies in the country, but we don't share that and we don't have that. We have inequalities that shouldn't be there. And for me, the way that we can fundamentally get our hands on the levers of power that will help us grow the economy but share it more equally, have powers over welfare and social security, and to help build that positive future for people. For me, that's a driving force as to why I want to see a yes.
I just want to go back down to the audience and then Sanjeev Kohli, who hasn't spoken on this subject. So just down into the audience first, and the lady in the front, in the pink. Yes, madam.
I would just like to point out to Mr Sarwar that he's ignoring the fact that according to OECD figures, the UK is the fourth most unequal country in the civilised world, in the developed world. You're totally ignoring that, and there is no sign of that changing under a UK Westminster government.
OK, thank you. No, I'll take a few first. The lady just there, yes.
Yeah, I'd like to come back to a point that Mr Sarwar made about independence being us all focusing on independence, and we really shouldn't be looking at it. It's a huge opportunity for us to vote on a future that matters for all of us. But also I'd like to come back to the point that you made on the national minimum wage. There's a huge disparity, as I think someone else mentioned, about the national minimum wage in Scotland and what's needed down in the southeast of England. Surely in an independent Scotland we would have the ability to set a national minimum wage that reflects the needs of those people within Scotland.
Thank you very much, and waiting patiently down the front.
Thank you, and just to address the kind of initial point, my belief is we don't need to look very far back in history to understand that, in times of austerity, which is certainly what we've had over the last 5 to 10 years, the radical and indeed the nationalist opinion tends to increase. And
is that a good thing? Are you
certainly not, no. And I believe that unfortunately is what's happened here. Yes, times have been hard, but for many, many years, even through the 90s, a Westminster government has served us relatively well in terms of being a prosperous nation. And I'd be keen to proceed.
We'll take one more, just in the very middle, the lady right in the middle in the purple.
I find it quite hypocritical when you talk about national minimum wage, and one of your colleagues in a recent interview said that because of the levers that we have on our budgets, the Scottish Parliament have, you say that you can only pay out once, yet when questioned on where you would find more money for childcare, you said you would take it away from small business relief. what happens to that businessman that employs 23 to 30 people? How is he going to then increase the minimum wage when he then gets his small business rates relief taken away from him? It just doesn't make sense. The hypocrisy is rife in the Labour Party and most of the Better Together campaign. I just don't understand how you can boo the SNP or boo the Yes campaign, but then when actually questioned, you have not got a great enough answer, a good enough answer.
Thank you very much. I will come to you in a minute. I'm aware that Sanjeev Kohli's been waiting very patiently.
Well, when I was 5 or 6 and I was sort of thinking about what the future would be like, I was thinking jetpacks and robot butlers. I certainly wasn't thinking food banks in the year 2014. It's ludicrous and it's heartbreaking that these things exist. But I think with regards to the independence debate, it's a bit of a red herring because it's Britain-wide, it's worldwide. There are food banks in Portsmouth, in Warrington, in Newcastle. And, you know, the problem I find with, like I say, I'm still swithering on the whole independence thing. And well, I don't pretend to be sort of fiscally intelligent and can barely run my own bank account, thanks very much. But you know, with the best will in the world, you know, the SNP and the Yes campaign don't really know how exactly they're going to hand, you know, there are too many unknowns. I mean, I don't think food banks are going to be a thing of the past very soon in Scotland. So I think it's sort of a red herring with regards to the independence debate, I have to say.
But in terms of the future, it is about saying, well, what is the best way to tackle that, and can you tackle it in a different way, and how can we as a society make sure that we've got solutions for Scotland? And yes, you know, a lot of issues are international, but in terms of social security in particular, the opportunities to do things differently in Scotland and to make sure that we can use the wealth that we have and in a more fair and equal way is one of the arguments. Now, different countries will deal with things in different ways. It's just that if you're closer to your government, and that comes back to the point that you know, Alec was mentioning about government being closer, because you can be more adaptable to the needs that you have locally, and that's the difference with Scotland. Like many other countries in Europe, many of them are smaller than Scotland, but they can have solutions for themselves and be more, you know, more reactive. But the welfare state, if you look ahead, even 5-10 years, I am absolutely convinced that under a UK Westminster government of whatever colour, you're going to see the dismantling of the welfare state. And I think things will get worse. That will be worse.
I mean, who's being negative and scaremongering now? Okay. The reality is that Fiona has said we need independence to get a hold of the economic levers to make a difference. The reality is actually, based on the SNP's plans, we would actually have decisions taken about our spending limits, our interest rates, our borrowing limits, people's savings, people's mortgages, and impact on people's pensions being taken by the rest of the UK. Decisions that will impact people right here in Scotland, but actually not having someone in the room when those decisions are being taken. That's not credible and not acceptable.
Central argument is in terms of share of sterling, which this is the argument discussion about. We would have a share of sterling in terms of the central bank. It's independent. It's one of the first things that Gordon Brown did as Chancellor of the Exchequer was to make the Bank of England independent of the UK.
Okay, that's like saying you'd have a divorce but still share the bank account. It's just not credible. It doesn't make sense.
It's not a packet.
But there was two
No, we have to leave it there. To be fair, there were specific points raised for everyone in the panel, and we simply can't come back on every single one, so my apologies. We'll have to move on to the next question, which comes from Joe Allison, a retired engineer. Mr. Allison.
Good evening. Why won't Mr. Cameron debate with Alex Salmond?
Why won't Mr. Cameron debate with Alex Salmond? Alex Massey.
Well, the chief reason for that is because Alex Salmond wants to debate David Cameron. This may seem a petty thing, and it may seem tiresome, and in some ways it is thoroughly inadequate that the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom is so reluctant to make the case for the United Kingdom. I think that is a problem. But nevertheless, it is a sort of elementary rule of political campaigning that if your opponent wants you to do something, it is because he thinks he will benefit from it. And therefore, it is usually, not always, but usually a mistake to concede his request. That is the answer to the question. I wish it were more complicated than that, but it isn't.
But should he?
Well, I think he probably should. But on the other hand, you know, Mr. Cameron can read a poll just as well as Mr. Salmond can read a poll. And all the polls at present, and this may change, of course, indicate a no vote. So in that sense, why take the risk? Now, I think there is something a little thin-blooded about that, but I can understand why he takes that approach.
Sanjeev Kohli.
Yeah, I think what's happened here is that David Cameron somewhere has found a big, massive barrel of self-awareness. I think he, and give him credit for that. He's not trying to spin his way out of it. I think he admits that he would fail, but then it does play into the Yes campaign, because I think that there are certain junctions when you see a very big disconnect between Scotland and England. When I see David Cameron's face, there's a big disconnect. When there's a royal wedding. I mean, how many licences were applied for a party? Something like 9 or 10, and there was an official riot in Glasgow. So, the junction of that where there is a massive, almost cultural disconnect. I mean, this is beyond politics, actually. This is just cultural, and it will actually help the Yes campaign, I think. And at least David Cameron had the self-awareness to admit that.
I mean, nonetheless, you share something with David Cameron, which is the ambition for a no vote in this campaign. And he is the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, and as Sarwar, shouldn't he debate Alex Salmond?
Well, let's be absolutely clear. My number one priority is to make David Cameron the next unemployment statistic. So I have no sympathy with David Cameron as an individual or as a politician.
But he's still the Prime Minister, so shouldn't he be debated?
This is not a debate about the Scottish Government versus the UK Government. It's not a debate about Scotland versus England. It's not a debate about Alex Salmond versus David Cameron. This is a campaign in Scotland, for Scotland, led by Scots. And I think this tedious, constant bickering and hoping for a debate or writing letters about having a debate with David Cameron just actually makes Alex Salmond look very, very childish indeed. I'll set a challenge to Alex Salmond. Why won't he debate any Scot that's got a vote in this referendum? And the reason why he won't... Any Scot. He can pick any Scot who's got a vote in this referendum and have a debate. The reason why he won't is because he's scared, because he knows what he's trying to sell. Nobody wants.
Well, as it happens, the Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Danny Alexander, has challenged Alex Salmond today to a TV debate, saying, "I am the most senior member who would have a vote on this. He wants a debate with the UK Government. I hope he'll accept the challenge." Will he, Fiona Hislop?
Well, I think people expect there to be a debate and want there to be a debate between Alex Salmond and David Cameron, not just in Scotland, but also, I think, in the rest of the United Kingdom. And I suspect, as things develop before September, there might be more pressure. I actually think probably the points made by Alex have got a great deal of truth about them, but I think the media pressure that may develop, not just here in Scotland, but I think probably in England, may lead to some change.
But if the franchise is for Scots, if we in Scotland are going to vote, why should someone in London debate?
This is a choice between a system of government where it's the Scottish Government that represents the people of Scotland on all areas, or the Westminster Government. Is it a choice between two systems of government? And the leader of one system of government is the Prime Minister. And if it's nothing to do with Westminster, why are we getting William Hague and every single Cabinet Minister from coming up here?
Hang on a second, Fiona. First, you said that this isn't just a matter for the people of Scotland. Quite correctly, this is an issue that actually concerns people from all across the United Kingdom. And then you complain about people from other parts of the United Kingdom coming to Scotland and actually offering their views. You can't have it both ways.
Let's say one word and then down here. One really quick point. I think it's quite sad that we have a debate about a debate. Actually, what we should do is talk about the real issues that affect people. You've had Professor Hugh Pennington. You've had Professor Hugh Pennington this week question the SNP stance on tuition fees. The response: he's wrong. An independent expert: he's wrong. Let's have a debate with the Prime Minister instead. All right. You've got Sir William Patey talking about an ambassador for 25 years talking about Scotland's place in the world. We say the independent expert is wrong. Let's instead have a debate.
Well, for now,
or an economist. Let's talk about the real issues. And the reason why they don't want to talk about the real issues is because they don't have the answers to the questions Scots are asking.
To be fair, the question came from the floor. So let's ask people, what do you think? Do you think we should be debating the debate, or is this a waste of time? And what's your view on the issue? The gentleman right bang in the middle there, sir, with I think in the blue, yeah.
I feel it's Anwar wants it both ways. You're saying it's a Scottish issue. It should be debated amongst the people of Scotland, probably funded by the people of Scotland too. As a lady says, why is English politicians coming up and putting their oar in? It seems as if it's you that want it both ways.
OK, thank you very much. The gentleman there, just in the blue, yeah, that's it.
What's an independence referendum? Shouldn't David Cameron be trying to keep us part of Britain? So why isn't he trying to sell us Britain instead of just scaremongering and trying to make us scared of leaving?
OK, thank you. And the lady just to your right.
Should it be about what David Cameron wants? Does he not have a duty? Do the panel not feel he has a duty to come to Scotland to discuss it? And by the way, sending his ministers from Westminster is not a debate, it's just an engagement tool, which is not the same thing.
Is it working for you?
No.
All right, I got that idea. Thank you very much indeed. Let's come down, right down here to the front. And the gentleman in the blue just... Sorry, yeah.
Wouldn't sending ministers from Westminster be similar to bringing over film stars and pop stars from California who haven't lived in this country for many years?
Do you think there's a similarity between the two groups of people?
I think there might be.
Some more that I know. I don't know who should be more offended.
I would say at least the politicians, or most of them, pay tax to this country.
Okay.
The film stars and pop stars don't.
Yes.
Isn't it the case, in the truth, that Cameron is a big fearty and we continue to have remote control from London?
OK, thank you very much. Is he? I don't know.
What I was going to say was, look, I'm no fan of David Cameron. That's not exactly a secret. But actually, Alex Salmond's the fearty. What he's saying is, I'll only debate David Cameron. Debate any Scot that's got a vote. What's he scared of? What's he scared of?
Anna, the fundamental point is the No campaign defend the right for the Conservatives to run the government. That's permissible. You may not want David Cameron to be Prime Minister, but the constitutional arrangement is you are arguing for the permission for him to do that if you vote no.
Well,
that's what that
yes,
is.
indeed, because we are, whether one likes it or not, members of the United Kingdom. The United Kingdom electorate has chosen to, in its entirety, to elect more Conservative members of Parliament than Labour members of Parliament. I mean, that is, you have one MP in Scotland, but at the last election, the SNP talk about Scotland as though it was somehow a Tory-free zone. 1 in 5 Scottish voters at the last election voted for the Scottish Nationalists. 1 in 6 voted for the Scottish Conservatives, which suggests that, if you like, the fundamentalist base of both parties is roughly equivalent in size.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you. Now, we're going to move on to our next question, which comes from Arthur Black.
Will the redistribution of wealth plans, as proposed by the Scottish National Party in an independent Scotland, encourage salary and wage earners to move south to avoid higher taxes?
OK. You thinking particular big earners? Is that what you're thinking, big earners?
I think they will have to increase the taxes to cover the promises they've made. There's no doubt. They talk about getting rid of Trident, but they're then going to have unemployment in Helensburgh, BAE Systems, Rosyth, Kinloss, all over the country where there are bases.
Thank you very much, sir. So the question is, will the redistribution of wealth in Scotland encourage earners to move south to avoid tax increases? Sanjeev Kohli.
Well, I mean, this is my problem with the Yes campaign. I mean, I have problems with both sides, but you ask 100 different experts about whether taxes will go up and you get 305 different answers. So the problem is, we have no crystal ball, and obviously the onus is on the Yes campaign because they're the ones that want to change the status quo. I personally, at the moment, there are too many variables for me. I don't, you're saying that taxes will go up and, you have your theory about that. I'm not sure if they will, but my problem is that it's still very, very uncertain. And I think if everyone's being honest, no one can really tell.
Doesn't this, Fiona Hislop, get to the heart of your problem here? Is that the uncertainty makes people wary? Well,
there'll be uncertainty even if you vote no, because you won't know what the tax rate will be in 5 or 10 years' time from whatever Westminster government you have. So the point is, which economic model do you think will be able to grow Scotland's economy? Because I think the big challenge is to grow the tax base, to have more people working to pay the taxes that we need to share to make sure that we can tackle the issues that we have in Scotland. That's why childcare is one of the big arguments that we have in terms of making sure we have the control, to make sure in terms of making sure that the taxation that can be raised by having more women be able to work for longer hours, because that's the challenge, as many of us have faced as mothers. What you do when your children are very young in terms of the hours you can work. If you can work more hours because you have better childcare, you pay more taxes into the Exchequer. We would like that to be the Scottish Exchequer, which you can then pay back in to providing... Now, that's the difference. So when you say taxes might go up, I think what will happen is we will actually have economic growth. If we had the same economic growth as other small countries over the last number of decades in Europe, we would have a 3% or more better growth rate, and that means more income coming in. It's a different analysis, a different perspective.
Are you suggesting that the childcare policy, for example, will raise more tax in implementing the policy than it will cost to actually put it in place?
The model we have is that you would actually increase productivity, you would increase tax take, you'd have an increase in women's participation in the labour market. If you look at Scandinavian countries...
And you've modelled that, and you can say that that would fund the policy and more.
So I was talking about this in the Scottish Parliament many years ago. It's about why we need to have concentration on the early years, but it's not just about the idea of the demand for childcare, which is huge. It's how you fund the supply of it. And that needs a radical change. And the radical change we can only get if we can have those powers that would allow us then to fund it back into the system.
Here's the fundamental
and it's redistribution.
point.
That's fundamental redistribution, benefiting families, benefiting mothers, and making sure our families, we don't have those 100,000 children living in poverty, which is the danger and the uncertainty of staying with the system we have.
But here's the interesting point. I might surprise the audience either in the room or maybe watching on TV. I agree with Fiona Hislop on childcare. But the interesting point about childcare is the Scottish Government has the powers to do that right now. We don't need independence. We don't need independence. We don't need independence.
You can do small amounts, not the radical change we need.
We don't need independence to have transformative childcare right now in Scotland. The powers exist in the Scottish Parliament to do it. They should go in and do it. This is not about changing women's lives. It's about winning women's votes, and that's why the cynical ploy has been seen right through by women.
Madam, with the scarf, just in the middle. Yeah.
The Labour Party, when they were in power in the Scottish Government, had the money to do it then as well, but they decided to send it back to Westminster instead of spending it in childcare. It's so hypocritical to condemn the Scottish Government when you know fine well that if they were to put the money into childcare just now, the money would go right down to Westminster, and they're already talking about slashing the Scottish budget by £4 billion if we vote no.
Thank you. Yourself, sir.
Yes, Mr Sarwar, you're talking about indecisiveness. And what happened with the bedroom tax with you? I mean, it took 45 Labour members actually withdrawn their vote, which could have won the abolishment of the bedroom tax.
You didn't vote to abolish the bedroom tax.
Again, that's not true. I mean, it was a parliamentary motion.
Didn't vote, though,
it was a parliamentary motion lodged by the Labour Party. So the very notion that Labour opposed its own motion is ridiculous.
But you didn't vote.
I was there for the stages when it was going through the legislative process for the bedroom tax, and we voted against it every single time.
Why didn't you vote?
Why were the SNP absent? No, it wasn't the final moment. That wasn't the final moment. I voted against all the legislative stages when the bedroom tax was being introduced. I opposed the bedroom tax.
Mr Sarwar, you fought so hard not to get it, but you didn't follow through.
I'm absolutely clear that Labour will abolish the bedroom tax if it returns to government in 2015. But again, we're dodging the big issue here. But the fundamental point which the gentleman raises is around competition across the UK, and it actually touches upon a point made earlier on by the lady about the minimum wage. We actually haven't had a pledge from the SNP about what happens around workers' wages or workers' rights in the workplace. But what we have had is a commitment that we will have one tax cut, and that's a tax cut for the biggest businesses across the country. And that is a tax cut of corporation tax for the biggest businesses, at the same time meaning cuts for other services.
Alex Massey, what I do want is, and
this is the pledge we do have as part of the UK, is to outlaw the misuse of zero-hour contracts, to increase the minimum wage and make sure we have fairness in the workplace. That can happen as part of the UK.
I want to come to Alex Massey.
It's always lovely to see a member of the Scottish Labour Party get a kicking. Those of you who are inclined to think that the Scottish Labour Party are a hopeless bunch of lumpen numpties are not wrong. But the question, childcare, the question was not about childcare. Childcare, like motherhood and apple pie, is a good thing. But the question was not about that. The question was about whether, should Scotland vote for independence, there would be pressures on wealthy earners and wealthy corporations, wealthy businesses and so on to move their activities south of the border. And the suggestion from the questioner, who I think may be a no voter, was that if taxes go up in Scotland, this will encourage people to leave Scotland. Now, in this sense, I think the questioner is absolutely right, which is one reason why the SNP are very careful to suggest to you that your taxes will not increase if the SNP govern an independent Scotland. John Swinney has made that quite clear, that in addition to a lower rate of corporation tax, 3% lower than whatever rate of corporation tax is levied at Westminster, that in addition to that, he sees no reason to change rates of personal taxation.
But that sounds like a reason for you to vote yes.
No, this is all agreeably neoliberal. I think that it is certainly true that those people who dream of a socialist republic in Scotland are going to be sorely disappointed by the facts of life in an independent Scotland, because the facts of life are fiscal facts, and those fiscal facts are conservative, I'm afraid. Now, Alex Salmond wants you to believe otherwise. At First Minister's Questions last week and so on, he suggested that in addition to taxing at the same rate, an independent Scotland governed by the SNP would borrow less and spend more. So, borrow less, spend more, tax the same. Now, at some point, you have to realise, I think, that you're being sold a line when it comes to these sorts of things. Okay. Nevertheless, it is the case that independent Scotland would have very little room for manoeuvre because of the risks of capital flight, both of wealthy individuals and of businesses upon whom the country relies. And as a result of that, economic policy in an independent Scotland and the rates of tax and the regulatory regime and so on would not actually be vastly different from whatever is set at Westminster, because Westminster will cast a large shadow that we cannot escape, whether we think it desirable to escape that shadow or not.
Well, let's have a couple of facts on this. If you look at what the SNP has done and what we've done under devolution, in terms of taxation, business rates, as I referred to try and keep small businesses, particularly in the high street, and small businesses working and functioning, and also the council tax freeze to make sure that family incomes at least were protected as much as possible. So there's a way you can do that, as well as implement socially just policies like free prescriptions, like the abolition of tuition fees. I was the minister that took through that. You can have that balance, and that's the type of country I want, that can have that economic growth agenda, but make sure we share it and share it fairly. And in terms of the economic strength, it's relative. The point about the borrowing and the debt issue is the UK is currently £1 trillion in debt. Okay, £1 trillion. If you look at the structures of other European countries, they have not got the same GDP to borrowing debt as the UK has. Scotland's economic strength would put us in a preferable position, a better position than the rest of the UK.
Bad one.
But the issue is, and this is a fundamental, again, facts of the debate. George Osborne came up some time ago and said, this independence debate is going to mean that we're going to have less inward investment. Can I tell you, Scotland has outperformed most of the rest of the UK, second again in terms of inward investment.
But
people
the fact that George
locate
Osborne
and have
says something
jobs here.
stupid is no reason or justification for Alex Salmond to say something equally stupid.
He didn't.
OK, that's it. Let's move on. We'll move on. We have another question. Apologies to those who had their hands up there, but perhaps you'd like to contribute on this, which is from Edith MacDonald. Edith MacDonald.
Hi. If Scotland votes no, will we still be in the UK? I mean, in the EU? In the next 10 years, will we still be in the EU in the next 10 years?
If Scotland votes no, will this country still be in the European Union in 10 years' time? Anas Sarwar.
I'm confident the answer to that is yes, and the reason why I say that is you have the CBI right across the UK saying they're in favour of the UK being part of the EU. You have every trade union right across the UK saying there's benefit from being part of the EU, and you have every mainstream political party right across the UK saying we're better off as we're part of the EU. The reality is that the real test in terms of Scotland's place in the EU comes from this referendum argument and debate. And the most important point is not just the membership itself, but what the terms of that membership means for people right here in Scotland on the rebate, on the EU currency, and on other areas that involve everyday life right here. So the best way of dealing with this is to vote no on this referendum and to make sure if we do have a referendum on the EU, it's one to keep the UK as part of it.
Just to remind people, of course, that there is possibly going to be a referendum on the European Union and the UK's membership if the Conservatives win the next general election, assuming Scotland hasn't voted for independence, if that makes any sense. So there are some ifs, but there is a possibility. Sanjeev Kohli, do you think that if Scotland votes no, we will still be in the EU in 10 years' time?
I think, yes, I think we will still be part of the EU.
How can you be sure?
Well, that's the whole problem with the debate. I mean, there are so many variables and so many ifs and buts.
On both sides, I suppose.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, it is pure guesswork. But yeah, I mean, I do think it'll still be part of the EU.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose it does. If I can go back to the questioner, I mean, are you suggesting, look, England is likely to vote to leave the EU, and Scotland would therefore be perhaps dragooned out without a vote for the Scots?
I mean, there are so many questions about, what happens if Scotland's not part of the EU and if we can't get in and we have to pre-negotiate when the UK is going to be on a referendum soon about whether they go in or out, so...
I think what the questioner is absolutely right is the exact same arguments that we make for Scotland to stay part of the UK actually reflect the same arguments about the UK's role in the EU. The fact that we do more business with the rest of the UK than we do with the rest of the world is a strong argument about keeping a single market that benefits Scotland across the UK. The exact same argument about the UK, the trade it does with Europe and the EU is more than it does with the rest of the world, and that's why it makes sense for the UK to be part of the EU. The exact same arguments apply. Why would we break away from a successful single market of the UK and a successful market that's the EU?
OK, we'll take a couple more points from the floor. The gentleman 3 rows back on the edge, yeah.
Question about would Scotland be part of the EU in 10 years' time is not a decision for Scotland to take. A lot of people will say, yes, Scotland should remain in the EU, very desirable. The decision will be taken outside of the UK by other members of the EU. And it's increasingly looking that a number of countries, like Spain, would not want a successful Scotland to be part of the EU because of the possibility of their country breaking up.
Thank you very much. And just in front of you in the purple shirt and tie, sir, on the end.
Can I say to Mr Salwa that you only need to go 5 miles along the road from where we're all sitting here to the local yacht club, Royal Greenock Yacht Club, with a membership, something under 1,000. I can say with certainty that every businessman in that place is desperate to be out of Europe. And I suggest that that could be replicated around every such club in Scotland.
OK, thank you very much indeed. We'll come right over here to the lady with her hand up over this side. Yes.
I'd like to go back to a point that you made about the European Union. Obviously, there is uncertainty at every election time. I'm quite certain there's a number of us who didn't expect to be in a Tory Lib Dem coalition at this very moment in time. When it goes to the possibility of a referendum on the EU, depending on obviously what happens in September, that same uncertainty is going to lie because obviously there is that proposed referendum for the UK and Scotland. So I think basing your argument on the fact that there is uncertainty and the fact that we don't know what's going to happen post the 18th of September is a kind of moot point. OK,
thank you very much. We'll come down to the gentleman in the front who's been waiting quite a long time. Yes, sir.
Well, I agree with the point made about entry. If Scotland votes yes, it's not guaranteed we're allowed to enter. We could be in a ludicrous situation where one of the reasons for voting yes is to stay in the EEC and we end up out it. Equally, in the subsequent, if we end up with a no result, there is a possibility of a referendum, but it's more likely with the Scots vote being involved at that referendum will vote to stay in the EU. And there is a lot of strength of feeling of a lot of the English folk in some of the cities, and it's more to do with migration. It is a big issue. But hopefully the economic arguments will prevail, and that we'll. But either way, we could both countries, both the rest of the UK and Scotland, could end up either in the EU or out of the EU, and either permutation, quite honestly.
Thank you very much, Sir. Fiona Hislop.
I think it's quite clearly in Scotland's interest. I think it's in the interest of the rest of the UK to remain and stay part of the European Union. And I think the real danger we have, and I think it's a very important question, the question was asked, do we know in 10 years' time? Well, we don't know. I think everybody in the panel, and I think obviously a clear number in the audience, although with some exceptions, think that there is an interest for Scotland remaining part of the European Union because of the jobs, the services and the collective aspects of that. I want to make sure we have our own voice in there. I represent Scotland in terms of attendance at European Council. I have to sit behind the representative from the UK government, even when they're discussing issues around devolved areas. Fishing, for example, we know from the records that previously governments have said that Scotland's fishing interest, vital to us, is expendable. So we need that right. But the concern I really have, and I spend a reasonable amount of time talking to people from other countries in my responsibilities, is there's a real serious concern that David Cameron is boxing himself into a corner with the in-out referendum. And I don't think that's in anybody's interest, regardless of the vote in the autumn.
OK, thank you very much. We need to very briefly ask Alex Massey and then we'll squeeze in one more question.
Fiona Hislop's right that the Prime Minister is making a complete hash of his European policy, but that's a different matter. The question was, on the balance of probabilities, yes, the United Kingdom will remain a member of the European Union in 10 years' time, just as on the balance of probabilities, Scotland will remain a part of the United Kingdom in 10 years' time.
Thank you very much. Right, and a final question from David Wilson. David Wilson.
If Robert Burns were alive today, would he be a yes or a no voter? Please refer to a poem to support your argument.
Oh, it's a challenge. OK, so would Burns have said yes or no? And you must refer to a poem. I think you can... We might get away with not doing that. It's not an exam, but we'll see. We'll see how we get on. Who would like to have a crack at that? Sanjeev Kohli?
Blimey. I mean, my instinct is that Burns would vote for independence.
Why?
Blimey, OK.
Quote.
The Ode to a Mouse That Roared. I've slightly changed the title of that poem, but that's what I'm going with.
All right, thanks very much. Anna Sarwar.
I think the reality is we don't know how he would have voted. I think it's safe to say he definitely wouldn't have voted Lib Dem, but that's another point altogether. I think either side could pick individual poems to make the case for their own argument.
Go on then.
But I'm not going to try that just now, although I'm in the process of writing my Burns speeches for next week, so any tips are more than welcome.
Now would be a good opportunity to try some quotes.
I generally think that you'll see in the next couple of weeks people on the yes side using poems to try and make a claim that Burns would vote yes. You'll see people on the no side trying to make claims that Burns would have voted no. The reality is we don't know. If he had a vote, it'd be interesting to find out, but he doesn't. But let's focus on the people who do have votes.
Alex Massey.
I suppose To a Louse is the most appropriate poem when it comes to Holyrood and Westminster alike. Would Burns have voted yes or no? I mean who cares? Suppose you claim him for the yes side and so on. Well, then you say, well, Sir Walter Scott would have voted no, and Robert Louis Stevenson, living in Samoa, wouldn't have had a vote at all. Where does it all end? Would Jesus have voted yes? What about Jean Brodie or Greyfriars Bobby? I think the side that can claim the Greyfriars Bobby vote is probably the one that will win the referendum.
All right. Fiona Hislop.
Well, as Scotland's Culture Secretary and also as a girl that was brought up in Alloway, I went to Alloway Primary School, I do care about Robert Burns, but I also care enough that I don't think I want to see any side trying to grab him, because I actually think in terms...
And would he have voted yes or no?
He would not have had a vote on the basis that the common man didn't have the franchise at that point.
Well, they do now. Would he have voted yes or no?
The story, I think he would have voted yes, but I think that to try and...
Shock horror.
You have to justify that with a quote.
Well, because he has written that the first books that he was ever given was a book about Hannibal and also one about Wallace. And the book about Wallace developed in, and I can't remember the quote exactly, a prejudice in favour of Scotland that runs deep to the end of time. So I think in terms of that, so his sentiment is, but please respect our bard. As a girl from Alloway, please respect Robert Burns and honour his memory on the 25th of January.
Thank you. It's a lovely note to end on. Thank you very much indeed. Well, apologies to those who still have their hands up, but our hour is up. If, though, you want to join us next time, we will be travelling around Scotland. And next month we'll be in Kelso on the 18th of February. The following month we'll be in Kirkcaldy on the 18th of March. To take part, just go to the BBC website and search for Referendum Debate. All that remains is to thank our panel here, to thank the audience very much indeed for your time and your questions. And from Greenock, a very good night.